Good afternoon. I'm delighted that Ashley Whillans is with us. We're talking about change makers, and so much change begins with you, the entrepreneur. So we're delighted to have Ashley Whillans to talk about her new book. Ashley is a Harvard Business School professor and a behavioral scientist, and her research explores the connection about how we spend time and how we experience happiness, most often the trade-offs between time and money. Her new book, Time Smart: How to Reclaim Your Time and Live a Happier Life, came out a few weeks ago, and you ought to pick it up. Ashley, welcome. I'm delighted that you are here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a bit more about the time poverty epidemic, as you talk about in your book. What's a time poverty epidemic, and is it really that bad?
Yes, it's really that bad. So the research that I've been doing on time poverty looks at this feeling of being overwhelmed by the demands of work and life. And so as a social psychologist, I define time poverty as a feeling of having too many things to do and not enough time to do them. And in large scale data that I've analyzed of almost 3 million Americans, 80% report feeling time poor, like they feel overwhelmed by the demands of work and life. This is regardless of how much money people make, their demographic background, and their personality characteristics. So it doesn't matter whether you're richer or poorer, older or younger, male or female. These feelings of time poverty exist for all of us, and they come at a cost to our happiness.
And you talk about that we should all strive for time affluence. What's time affluence? And I know you talk a lot about this in the book, and it's really engaging and thoughtful. What's time affluence, and why should we strive for that?
So time affluence is this feeling like you have enough to do all the things that you want to do or have to do. In my research, people who are time affluent feel like they're able to put time as the most important resource in their life as opposed to money. And as a result, people who feel time affluent are also able to give more of themselves to the causes and the communities that they care about. They spend more time in social interactions. They spend more time engaged in meaningful work, and they're more civically engaged. So this feeling of time affluence goes beyond stress and joy that we experience. People who are time focused and time rich are able to give back more to their communities.
You set up a good conversation between a couple of folks that you've created in the book, Taylor and Morgan. Taylor values time and Morgan values money. What's the most common time trap, Ashley? I mean, in some part, for so many of the entrepreneurs, the CEOs, the investors who are listening to us today, busyness is status.
Yeah, and this is a really important point. So the first part of the book, I talk about the time traps that we find ourselves in that can make us time poor. And definitely focusing on money at any and all cost is one of the most major culprits of this sense of time poverty. As you mentioned, busyness is a status symbol in our society. We give preference and status to people who seem always too busy to have any time to speak with the people around them whose calendars are always full. However, this busyness as a status symbol comes at a cost to well-being and even to long-term planning. So being time first, time focused, time smart isn't just about being, I think people think that it's about being lazy or being extravagant in terms of time, but it's about being a ruthless prioritizer and keeping both the long-term and short-term in mind. So a few of the major time traps that we succumb to are being money-focused, on relying on the sense of busyness as a means by which to examine our own and our employees' success, and falling victim to this prioritization of the urgent as opposed to the important. So we can talk about that in a moment, but mere urgency and this constant connection to technology also contribute to making us feel time poor.
We're going to go there. Tell us about what brought you to this book, because I thought so much of this is, of course, reflects your own perspective and your own experience. How did you come to recognize this in your own experiences in life, and some of the tactics that you immediately had to implement? So, for the folks who are the Ashley Whillans of a few years ago, talk about that a bit and what brought you to that.
The whole reason I wrote the book actually was due to my own personal struggle in putting time first in my personal life. As a young professional, I sacrificed a lot of my time, my leisure, and my social relationships to focus on work, to having the best opportunity in my career. And it got to the point in the first year of my tenure track job at the Harvard Business School where I was faced with the irony of studying time, money, and happiness every day. I'd be giving talks at various universities across the country on the importance of putting time first in order to have better social relationships and more meaningful work and a more meaningful life. And at the same time, my own personal life was in shambles. I was breaking up with a partner of 10 years. I hadn't been home in a year and a half. I was unable to go to a cousin's funeral because I was teaching. I wasn't there for my best friend from home who was giving birth to her first child. And I felt like if I couldn't put time first as someone who knew the intrinsic value of a time-focused life from their own data, if I had just written a dissertation on the importance of time versus money for subjective well-being across all facets of one's life, and I couldn't put it into practice, then I must not be the only one struggling. So I wrote the book to try to understand how to take the science of happiness and put it into practice in my own life and to share that experience with others. I think in terms of the strategies that I immediately employed, it really does start with a mindset shift. I think for myself and so many working professionals, we're trained from a young age to put money and work above all else in our lives. If there's ever a decision between working a few more hours versus taking an afternoon off and spending time with a friend or family member, we're taught to prioritize work first as opposed to that social interaction. However, in my own life, I started to flip the script. I started to say that, no, my social interactions are more important, or at least as important as work. And through that mindset shift of realizing the inherent value of things outside of work and busyness, that I could start to make daily decisions that were somewhat more aligned with other goals in my life outside of being an ideal worker or productive employee. So first, it really started with a mindset shift for me. And then I just started to challenge myself to make small decisions around the margins, getting up and instead of the first thing I did in the morning being work email or a writing project, I would go to the gym. And the more that I started practicing putting myself, putting my friends, my family, my social relationships first, or at least sometimes prioritizing them, the better I got. And so the book is sort of a reflection of my own personal experience trying to live the science of time and happiness.
And that comes through. You talk about, and this is for any CEO who's listening to us, helping them and helping the people they care about find their big why. And you talked about the impact that your cousins, Mark and Paul, had on answering this for you. You even quote Harvard professor Dan Gilbert, stumbling on happiness. How do folks do that? I don't want to give away much of the book because I want people to read it, but what are some of the basic things that someone can do to change that mindset day to day?
Yeah, I think putting a physical reminder in your space about the importance of time and of social relationships, of the things that really matter to you, and seeing them every single day is really important. Really something small that you can do on an everyday basis. I know for myself and many leaders, I'm tied to my calendar. So I look to my calendar to tell me what I'm supposed to do, who I'm talking to. And I start building in even breaks of moments of reflection in my calendar where I can think about, hey, let's just stop at 10 a.m. on a busy Monday morning and stop for 5 minutes and think about, am I working on actually important stuff? Am I spending my time in a way that's consistent with my values? If not, why not? So just having daily, weekly reminders and check-ins with your own self to make sure that you're putting enough energy and attention and focus, both to major important projects at work, but also to important life goals outside of work. And using your calendar, using technology to help you stay on track, I think is one really concrete strategy that we can all use to make sure that how we live our lives on a daily basis matches our ideal version of our lives, how we would ideally like to be living our work days and our non-work days.
And that technology piece is so important. As I was reading your book, I kept thinking, is time affluence impossible given current technology? We're so connected. whether it's Fitbit, whether we're looking at our calendar, whether even when we're sitting in a meeting and something buzzes in our pocket, Ashley, how do we go on a tech? Do we have to go on a tech fast for a bit of time? How do you think about that? Because we are so tethered to our various devices.
Yeah, technology is a really important culprit of time poverty. As I mentioned in the book, technology creates time confetti, which is this idea that instead of having 1 hour of leisure or 1 hour of uninterrupted work, our productive focus time and our personal time gets fragmented into a bunch of small bits of time that are easily squandered and lost. And so we're unable to enjoy our leisure to the same extent as we did before, and we're unable to be as heads down focused as we were within that same hour. And that's really a culprit for these feelings of time poverty, because this sense of task switching, role switching, goal switching, this creates this feeling of being overwhelmed. So this is why a lot of the data suggests we actually have more discretionary time than we used to, but we feel more stressed out. And one of the explanations for this paradox is our technology just disrupting and distracting all the free time and productive time available to us. So a couple of strategies I advocate for is using technology to work for you. So you want to be thinking about being very mindful and strategic about when you allow interruptions versus when you don't. We've also been doing some research during the work from home period of time, since people are getting more email, more alerts, they're on calls much longer because every conversation has to be a meeting in the virtual work environment. And we're really advocating for conversations about clear norms and expectations within a team about when employees are going to be on versus off their email. So setting very rigorous, clear norms about what's expected around constant communication can be really important, as is do not disturb signs, and really ensuring that you have the software and application tools needed to block yourself. I think one of my PhD students has a great dissertation showing that we like to rely on our own willpower to move important goals.
It's hard.
When we're trying to lose weight, we want to do it ourselves. When we're trying to reduce our technology use, we try to do it ourselves. And we should really give up and let someone else help us. So these tools and platforms that block you from certain sites, or these applications that turn off all Wi-Fi on your family's phones at the dinner table, we should be relying more and more on these situational strategies to help us with our own technology use, because technology has conflicting goals with a lot of the research that I talk about and living a time-focused and time-affluent life. Technology wants our eyes on the screen, and we, to live a productive and mindful life, need to get our eyes away from the screen every once in a while. So knowing this, you can employ technology to help, and also creating clear norms and having very open conversations around technology use, not just at the individual level, but at the team or organizational level, is critical, because we can't manage these distractions on our own, especially because my use of technology influences you and your use of technology influences me. So this really needs to be something that we manage at a collective level as well as at an individual level.
Great advice for CEOs who are listening. So I take it you're not in favor of that policy that says we're going to turn on Zoom and you've got to be on it 8 hours a day.
Definitely not. I mean, I've been doing a lot of research with a large management consulting firm, and Zoom fatigue is real. I mean, I experienced this as a knowledge worker myself, especially at this point. I think there's a major push based on some of the best data from my colleagues and my own data suggesting we need to do everything we can to shorten meetings, to shorten the workday, because work is expanding to the time that we give it, which currently is 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, since we're all living at work, working from home, however you want to see it. So we need to be shortening our meetings, making video optional, and if anything, allowing for more spontaneous social interaction. If you schedule back-to-back meetings every day, day in and day out, your employees don't have the opportunity to engage in more casual conversation with each other, which we know, and which I talk about in the book, is not only good for happiness, but good for creativity and product innovation. So we want to be thinking about leaving slack in between our meetings so that individuals can make use of the fact that they're working from home, take care of personal or other professional obligations, and give a chance to allow for these more spontaneous interactions that are missing in the virtual work environment.
Ashley, what do you say to folks who say, well, that sounds great, but I am so stressed. I just don't have time to manage my time. With the pandemic, I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about missing a Zoom meeting. Got all this anxiety. What do you say to those folks? Because I know that you do in the book.
Yeah, so this is an example of what we were talking about before, called the mere urgency effect. So when we're feeling stressed, our natural inclination is to take on more tasks. Now, why is this? It's because we want to feel in control and confident. We're trying to make up for this feeling of being overwhelmed by finding some small tasks that we can complete, like getting to the bottom of our inbox or saying yes to a meeting, that give us that boost of confidence in the moment, this boost of self-efficacy. We really want to be mindful around that, particularly when we're feeling anxious, because it's counterproductive in the long run. You might say yes to a meeting, your inbox might be at zero, but
Right.
as you do that, your larger, more important tasks are building on top of each other, and you're getting even more and more overwhelmed in the long term. So what feels like a short-term fix, it's like, kind of very similar when you go to your favorite snack when you're feeling stressed. It's very similar, but in terms of,
Right.
time affluence, you say yes to something, you check an email, you get something out of your inbox, and that gives you this hit of goal completion, but really it's making you further behind on the major important goals, the things that are going to get you your promotion or land that next project with a client. So before you say yes to anything, and before you think about jumping into that next meeting, you really need to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it to relieve some sense of anxiety? If yes, then maybe sleep on it, think about it, talk to a colleague about it. In terms of saying no, or this idea that when we're feeling uncertain, we just always want to be people pleasers, this is a real thing. We see this in our data. So junior employees and women are especially less likely to ask for more time on adjustable deadlines at work, which undermines the quality of their work. And part of the reason for that is because they want to seem like a good colleague. They're worried about how others perceive them. But in our studies, we find that senior level management sees individuals who manage their time and are fiercely protecting their time, asking for more time when they need it, as more committed and higher performers, as opposed to people who don't and maybe turn in lower quality work. So if anything, our fears are unfounded in the data. Individuals should be advocating for what they need in terms of the resources they need to get their job done, whether that's more money for a project or in my research, more time. So kind of taking that all together, I would say, if anything, when we protect our time, a very valuable resource, and we defend it to our senior colleagues, they're going to appreciate us more, not less. And chances are they're feeling overwhelmed as well. So it might even open up a larger dialogue within the individual or team and organizational level. So I would say you should definitely advocate for more time, especially if you feel uncertain about doing so, because that's when you're most likely to need it.
And so for our CEOs who are listening, and I hope we can influence and encourage them to read this book, vacations, we're pandemic, we're all home anyway. We really can't go anywhere. If you had something to say, advice for both our employees, our executives, but also our CEOs, talk about vacations during this pandemic.
Yes.
Ashley.
So vacations are always something that we need to be encouraging our employees to take. Pre-pandemic, 75% of employed Americans did not take all the vacation that they were entitled to, paid or unpaid. And that's getting worse, not better, because people are exactly saying this idea of, well, where am I going to go? Like, what am I going to do? So why would I even bother? And we're in an economic recession, which my data suggests encourages people to focus more on time because they're more on money rather, because they're uncertain about their financial futures. And so this creates a perfect storm of people never taking their vacation. So this is really, really important, especially because employees are burnt out. There's a lot of issues going on. A lot of employees and organizations have been personally affected, and burnout and well-being has always been a major problem. It costs companies billions of dollars every year in presenteeism and in workers quitting because they feel so overwhelmed. So if employees are are not feeling like they want to take paid vacation, it's really up to HR and leaders to set a precedent to take vacations themselves, to encourage vacations via incentives, to make it mandatory to take vacation. And one other piece of data that I'll provide that I think is useful in terms of strategy, a lot of employees think that they'll need to take a lot of vacation in order to reap the emotional benefits. But the best data suggests that taking short, frequent vacations is better because you become more, as soon as you go back to work, the well-being benefits of a vacation dissipates quickly. So it's much better to take a couple of days off every 6 to 8 weeks than it is to take 1 2-week vacation every year. So if employees have time banked, PTO banked, then managers should really be encouraging them right now to take Fridays off, to take Thursday and Friday off a couple of times in the next quarter, because this is going to reduce employees' burnout, increase their well-being. And you also need to make sure they actually disconnect during that time. You could even encourage, I've seen some cute things from some of the consultants that I've been talking to. They take their families on vacations in their living room. So it is possible to have fun and pretend you're in the Mayan Riviera, even if you're just in your living room. I've seen it in my own interviews. So now more than ever, employers need to be encouraging employees to take the time that's been allocated to them.
Actually, you talk about in the book that this balance between time and money, it can't be done alone. You do it with a partner. Because the decisions around economics, the household, the balance of responsibility has to be a joint one. Speak to that and how people can work together, particularly with, you've got a couple of working moms and dads who are trying to balance their kids learning remotely. How should they be thinking about this as sort of a joint effort, Ashley?
Yeah, so I talk about 3 strategies for time affluence in the book: funding time, finding time, and reframing time. And I do talk about that mostly at the individual level. However, all of these strategies should be discussed, especially right now, given that we have less support via the market economy. It's a little bit harder. Childcare might be less safe. More kids are doing virtual school. To be thinking about these decisions at a collective level, as you mentioned. So in terms of funding time, this is the idea that we can spend some of our discretionary income to have more and better time, such as by ordering takeout or having someone clean our apartment or do the housework for us, yard work that we have in front of us, so that we can have more time to spend in other ways. We've been seeing during the pandemic that time-saving purchases have been particularly important for relationship satisfaction, even for what would be classified as lower income workers who make below the median income of about $40,000 of household income per year. And one reason is exactly what you're saying. There's more stresses and strains on working families right now, particularly related to childcare and schooling. And so if there's any decisions you can make around funding time, so sitting down just as you would trying to plan out your bills and expenses as a household, most of us don't think about time saving as a category of spending. If it's not something we're already doing, we don't usually have that in a category of our monthly expenses. We might think about experiences like right now, maybe that is sort of limited, but maybe we think about going on a short road trip, or we think about basic utilities, rent, gas, car maintenance, but we don't often think about something else that's necessary, which is spending some of our money to have more free time. So if you have material purchases that you're thinking about buying, like furniture for the house or picture frames, something more decorative, think about allocating that money instead to time-saving purchases. We've been seeing a lot of data right now during the pandemic that this is particularly helpful for working families with young kids at home. And then in terms of the second strategy, which is finding time, this is where this joint decision-making processes could be particularly helpful. So the idea behind finding time is that we want to maximize the amount of time we spend in positive activities and minimize the amount of time that we spend in negative activities. So a lot of us go through life without ever having an explicit conversation with our partner about who likes doing which chores and whether we should be engaging in the housework more equitably. We might fight about it, but we don't sit down and have a discussion about it. Who likes doing which kinds of tasks more? And so if there's any way of thinking about breaking your habits, now is a great time since our habits have already been disrupted, and reallocate chores based on who likes doing which activity more, or who has more or less time at the beginning or the end of the day for basic childcare and other necessities. I think having these active conversations are something that we don't do as much in a sort of positive way as we could. We usually, again, we might fight about these kinds of things, but we don't sit down and try to plan our schedules jointly as a household as much as we should, and couples who do that are much happier. So those would be two ways of incorporating strategies, finding time and funding time from the book, to think about how we might employ some of those strategies with our partners, especially during the work from home period of time that many of us find ourselves in.
You talk a bit about things that we need to do from a big picture, community, policy standpoint, Ashley. And I had the benefit of reading your book at around the same time as I read Michael Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit. And he talks a lot about we are so busy, so overscheduled, that we get so caught up. There needs to be not just familial solutions, but we need broader governmental community solutions. You touch on that in the book, and I wonder if you give our viewers a bit of a taste of what you're thinking about, because I think they tie in pretty tightly to Professor Sandel's as well.
Yeah, so I've been doing some research trying to take some of these insights at the individual level and move them up to more of the collective level. Some of this work is inspired by Cass Sunstein, who's written a lot about ordeal costs in the context of government processes. So we want to be thinking about removing friction, which really means making processes simpler, so it takes less time for individuals who qualify for different benefits like welfare, education benefits, to get the benefits that they're entitled to without filling out a 50-page form, which is I used to work in government, so I know that most of those forms are 50 pages, and it's actually very difficult from a government perspective to simplify. But that is one strategy. We can think about applying that in the context of our organizations. Can we minimize the amount of paperwork? What does that look like? We know that employees who engage in all of this paperwork don't feel very good about it, and it's happening across all of our professions, from more call center type employees to lawyers to doctors. Paperwork has been on the rise, and so we want to be thinking about streamlining and simplifying our organizational processes, whether we're in government or we run a company, to reduce the time poverty that our institutions are creating for employees and for constituents who interact with them. Another policy that I've been thinking about, it relates to a lot of Bridget Schultz's work around offering time-saving vouchers to employees. So she writes about and runs a experiment with Stanford medical professors who are offered time-saving vouchers for different kinds of tasks that they take on at work that might not be formally recognized, like mentorship activities or giving talks publicly or even grant writing. And physicians who are professors there and are usually very busy and highly burnt out are given these time-saving vouchers for meals, for laundry, for childcare from their employer. And again, this is nice because, as we've already talked about, when left to our own devices, we often choose the cash as opposed to the time. So I think from an organization perspective, providing these time-saving vouchers in the absence of being able to convert them into cash is really important for getting employees to value them and to uptake them and for them to have their intended effects. And then finally, something I talk a little bit about is targeting the use of time-saving vouchers, particularly among those who are struggling to make ends meet. So we often think about people who are financially constrained as having a lot of time available to them. However, my research and others have suggested that people who make less money are more time poor, in part because they experience more time confetti, they commute longer distances, they work multiple jobs. They might be a single parent who is their primary caretaker and the primary breadwinner of the household. So they are very busy, very stressed and stretched, and are often unlikely to prioritize time for themselves because they're struggling to meet their basic needs. We've recently run a study in Kenya, and I'm replicating some of this work in India, showing that time-saving vouchers have similarly positive benefits for subjective well-being, relationship satisfaction, and reductions in stress for poor working mothers living in the largest informal settlement in Kenya as compared to unconditional cash transfers. And they have the added benefit that they help women enjoy their leisure more. Since leisure there is something that's not very prioritized, women working moms in general everywhere around the world have difficulty enjoying leisure when they find themselves with time to enjoy it. So the time-saving vouchers also had this added benefit of what my colleagues and I call legitimizing leisure. So broadly, I think we need to be mindful at an organizational level and at a societal level that people are not just considering money or not just materially constrained. They might also be time constrained. So we want to be thinking about removing administrative burdens and providing people with some available time, either via vouchers for various services or more paid time off that's mandatory as opposed to optional.
Such an incredibly thoughtful book. Folks, the book is Time Smart, How to Reclaim Your Time and Live a Happier Life. Ashley Whillans, thank you so much for taking the time with us, and I hope folks will take the time to get this really important and thoughtful book. It's a great read, lots of practical tips, and I hope you will all take the opportunity to find it at your local independent bookstore, including Wellesley Books, sponsor of this event, and read it soon. Ashley, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much.